Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to be talking about GlassMapper in this session. This is going to be more of a follow-up session to the first kickoff meet that we had. We had sort of introduced GlassMapper back then, so we're just going to be extending on that and talking more in detail about GlassMapper. So, just to give a brief introduction again, what is GlassMapper? GlassMapper is a home to the #1 ORM for Sitecore and Umbraco. For the purpose of this meeting, we're just going to be talking about Sitecore. And so GlassMapper can be used in two different ways. I mean, we are going to talk about code gen during this session, but it's not just about code generation. That is one part of GlassMapper. The other part of GlassMapper is providing support for strongly typed classes while you create your views and in page editor mode, and basically all the Sitecore features, providing support for all of the Sitecore features with strongly typed models, as opposed to just using the generic item object, as in the sitecore.data.item objects that Sitecore provides inherently. Now, why I say this is because this is to stress at the point that GlassMapper can definitely be used without serializing Sitecore items, but its benefits are best leveraged in tandem with one. And for the purpose of this presentation, again, we're going to be using TDS. And while you use it with a serializing tool, that's when you can use automatic code gen. And that's the feature that we're going to be leveraging during this presentation. So when we talk about code gen with GlassMapper, there are basically three different forms of code which can be generated. So that one includes creating the models, and each of these models are going to be corresponding with the templates of Sitecore. So it's basically going to be creating the classes and interfaces corresponding to the template structure that we have defined in Sitecore. In addition to that, there's also going to be template properties which are going to get defined. That would include your template ID and template name and things like that, if you wish to. And also there's an additional facility of generating item properties, and this is a little different from the models itself. So in case of item properties, these are going to be generated only if you specifically mention that you would like a certain item in Sitecore to be generated, to be mapped to the corresponding code. So obviously an item cannot have a class, because it's not basically a structure of its own. All it since it's just a content item, or any sort of item for that matter. So what does it generate when you do a code gen on an item? It gives you the item name, the item path, and most importantly, the item ID. So you can generate these item properties, so including the URL, and this is all configurable. We're going to look at that. So you can generate all of these properties by setting so in your TDS project. Now, so the first thing we're going to look at is what actually happens when you install Glass onto your solution. So say you have a Sitecore solution. The way to install or enable Glass on your solution is to go into NuGet. As of now, go into NuGet and get the Glass.Mapper.sc package from NuGet and install it to your solution. So we'll just quickly look at what it actually does, what change it makes in your solution. So for the purpose of this demo, I'm actually going to use the same solution that we had used in the previous presentation that we had during the kickoff meet. So this is a Sitecore solution that's already been set up, and I've actually already installed Glass on it. So I'm just going to show the updates that it makes to your solution. So basically it adds a few references, so the castle and the GlassMapper references, and also the web activator reference. So these are the references that get added. You have a couple of config files that get added, your GlassMapper config files in your include folder, and in addition to that, you also have two code files, GlassMapper code files on app.start. So this is what kicks off, binds GlassMapper to your solution. So these are the updates that are automatically made to your solution when you install GlassMapper from NuGet, when you install the package. Now, in addition to this, if you and this is just for the GlassMapper framework. So if you want to enable code gen, in addition to this, you also need to get the templates, the Glass templates, and add those to your solution. Now, that's not going to get automatically added when you install the NuGet package. So I think when we had done it, we had got it from GitHub, and yeah, so the Glass documentation actually provides the link to the GitHub repository where you can get the code gen templates. So just to show, these are the code gen templates. And in any TDS project where you would want to enable code gen, you need to have the code generation templates managed. They need to be added here. So that's that. And so we'll just look at a small example of code gen here. So I'm just going to go into Sitecore into my Sitecore instance. So I'm going to show you the simple template that I have, which we are going to use during this demo, and we'll look at the corresponding class that got generated using GlassMapper. So I just have a few simple templates. I created a product template for which we have SKU, name, which are single lines. So these are going to translate into strings. Status is a drop link, so it's a reference field, and this is going to be interesting, and we'll go and look into what actually happens in Glass. Image is a normal image field, then we have a multi-list and a general link. So all of these we can actually go in and see what it gets translated into in when the GlassMapper code gets generated. So I have two files here which we are again going to talk about, but for now the templates are actually included in so this corresponds to the master DB, this to the core DB, so we look at that. But in the master DB, this is the file that has gotten generated corresponding to the master database. So to look at product, just go here, and you can see that it creates the corresponding interfaces as well, so it's highly extensible that way. And when we look at the product template, so first things we saw was the name. So you can see that the name is a string as expected, SKU is a string, purchase link is a link. This is again a Glass field, so this automatically links the Sitecore general link field into a Glass link. And similar mapping is done for images as well, so you have a Glass field for image as well. Now what gets interesting is the reference fields. So in case of reference fields, so the categories was a multi-list field. So what you get is IEnumerable of GUIDs, or basically you just get a list of GUIDs. But that doesn't give you access to the items which are actually referenced in the multi-list. And we're going to see how we can get that to automap as well. And similarly for the drop link, since that can map only a single item, it's a single GUID. Alright. Now going back to the presentation, let me just see if I missed anything. Alright, so before I move on to the next slide, there's just one small thing I need to show. So we spoke about how we are installing GlassMapper on the solution. In addition to that, if you want CodeGen to work, you need to enable that on the TDS project. So let's look at master, how we do that. I'll just look at the properties and see and show you what configuration we've had to do to enable CodeGen. So we have a code generation tab here in the TDS project properties. So enable CodeGen, you select your project, and this is where you give the target file name. And this file is going to be created under the root of this project that you've selected here. And that's where all the auto-generated code is going to live. You can provide a base namespace, which is basically going to get appended to the assembly name of your web project itself. And that's, if you look here, that's the namespace that's going to be used. So we just go up. You can see the SC72 is my assembly name, and TDS master is the namespace that we had given here. And you have to provide the header transform and the project transform. So the header transform consists, these are basically T4 templates, and this contains the using statements and the base classes that we have. So the using statements and the base classes. So these properties are going to be available in every single item, in every single template model that gets created by GlassMapper. So in addition to that's it. So these are all the configurations that you need to do on your TDS project to get CodeGen working. And of course, you'll need to add the code generation templates, which should be available in GitHub. Right. So going back to the presentation. So when does CodeGen happen? We can of course manually kick off the code generation, but by default, whenever you do a sync of TDS with Sitecore, at the end of the sync, your code generation will happen. So you don't need to worry about there being sync issues, except for, I mean, weird source control issues that you might come into, and we're going to talk about that as well. But by default, whenever you do a whenever you do a sync with Sitecore on TDS, your code is going to get built again. Now, I spoke about a weird issue with TFS. So what we have faced with source control, and I'm not sure about other source controls, but with regard to TFS, when we get latest, we have actually faced issues of merging the TDS project file with the latest version from TFS. So we faced issues when certain templates we can see in the TDS project that they're available, but the code just did not get generated. So in that case, what do? You can actually go back to your solution. All right, so you can go to the master. So you go to your respective TDS project and say regenerate code. So that's when it regenerates the code for all the items that you have managed under this TDS project. For all of the items, it just regenerates all the code. So in this case, it creates all the classes all over again. So that's one of the strange scenarios that we have come across. Now, additionally, so we saw the GUIDs and the list of GUIDs being created, right, for the product. For reference fields, we saw the GUID and list of GUIDs being found. So how do we auto map the items, again, the referenced items, in a strongly typed class? So what we usually do is we extend this class that got created by CodeGen, and once in the extended class, what we'll go and say is categories. So we'll create a custom field, say called custom categories, and we're going to say that this is a list of a product category. So we're going to basically nudge it and say that, okay, for this field, and I should actually show that to you directly. So in models, I have a product.cs. You can see that the namespace, of course, matches what was there in CodeGen, because we are extending a partial class. So we were talking about categories. So we created a new property called custom categories, and we said that this is a list of product categories, which is the template of the referenced item that we are expecting. And we are giving GlassMapper a hint saying that this is the file name. So for the field name. So for the field categories, GlassMapper is going to automatically try to cast it into a list of product category. And if you've done it all right, whenever you get a product, it's directly going to give you the list of categories along with the product itself. So you don't have to do any, get reference field. We used to do a lot of coding and everything to get the get reference fields and everything. So now in this case, it's all, you just need to code the model right, and then it's automatically going to get filled. So that was about the reference fields. Now, okay, going back to the presentation, a small topic over here is customizing the T4 templates in GlassMapper. Why would we need to do that? I mean, definitely, since the code generation is happening using T4 templates, it's a very open resource available to us. We can customize it in any way we would want to. So why would we want to do it? In case of templates, as in when it's creating the classes for the or models for the templates in Sitecore, you might want to add additional properties to it. So by default, the version that we of the TT files that we had got from GitHub, it didn't have the template ID, but we wanted to add that. So definitely you just have to go into so you just have to go into the template file, into the TT file for item header in this case, because something like template ID, we would want to add it to the base class, which would be available for all the classes created by CodeGen. So I don't think I've added it here, but this is where you would add it in the interface and also in the class. So you would by default right now we have ID, item name, language, version, and URL. These are the things that the TT file by default comes with. So we can add things like template ID if we wanted to. And another scenario is, so by default this is actually just name. So if you had a template which had a field called name in Sitecore already, that would conflict with this property, because it would try to generate a class, and in that it would create a field called name, and then there would also be one in the base class. So then there would be a conflict. So in scenarios where you're using say Sitecore Commerce Connect, you have a product template and you can't really go and update those templates. That's not up to you because it's tied to a lot of other things in the Sitecore package itself. So in that case, you would rather probably come and change it here. So this is another scenario where you might want to update your TT file. And in addition to that, we actually ran into situations where we were trying to add the I think system templates. So here I've just added the user defined template. So if you try to add system templates, we ran into concerns where there were namespace conflicts. So that was another scenario where we had to add fully qualified namespaces instead, so to avoid the conflicts that we were facing. So that was about the T4 templates. All right, so this was all about models and about CodeGen and the classes that are getting created and everything. So now we are going to talk about views. So excuse me. So what does Glass provide to you with regard to views? So the main thing that Glass provides here is a slew of methods that you can use in your renderings with the strongly typed classes that you create, or the strongly typed classes that get automatically generated by Glass. All right. So I've just named a few here. The editable, render image, render link, begin render link. These are all pretty common. This is for any text, or rich text, or anything like that. And then you have render image for images. These two are for links. Now begin edit frame is actually a catch-all method that is provided by GlassMapper. And for any Sitecore old timers, this was also there in ASP.NET. We had a begin frame, I think, or edit frame. Sorry, we had an edit frame tag, an HTML tag, an ASP control rather. But I haven't used that much, so I'm just going to talk about the MVC counterpart here, which is the begin edit frame. And okay, so all of these, editable is by default obviously supported in page editor. So page editor mode, I think everyone should be aware, it's more of a tool which is available to content authors to manage their content in a more user-friendly UI. So any application that we develop, our primary goal should be making sure that everything possible to the highest extent is page editor editable. So with that goal in mind here, something to note is editable. Definitely it is by default it makes the text editable, and you need to pass in the strongly typed item as a reference so that it knows which item you're trying to edit. Alright, so in a similar fashion, image, link, all of these are also supported by page editor, except that by default is editable. A property or a parameter that goes into these methods, they're set to false. So you just need to toggle them to true and you'll get page editor support. So we're going to look at an example of how we have coded it in the view, and then look at a page in page editor mode to see that it's all editable, right? Now the begin edit frame, it's really cool here because this enables you to take any portion of HTML and make it page editor friendly. So it needn't be a known tag. That was the disadvantage of these other things. Render image has to be an IMG tag. Render link has to be an anchor tag. But begin edit frame, you can take any HTML and make it page editor friendly. but you will need to, because you are not expecting a known tag, so you will need to say which item and which field you're trying to edit, field or set of fields, right? So that's what begin edit frame is going to let you do, and we're going to look at a short demo of that as well, and this should be interesting to you too. We couldn't get this figured out when we were working on our project, begin edit frame. It's really cool. So this will let you even make drop links and multi-lists. So content author can go and change what they've selected in a multi-list in page editor mode. Yeah, so we have not done that before, so it's pretty cool. And I don't know how it was done in previous versions of Sitecore, but this one loves it here. It's pretty cool. We need to do this. Okay. So excuse me. Going into our code, we'll just look at, so what I'm going to do right now is you saw the Sitecore instance that I had, right? So what I've done is I've created a page for this product template under home, and for this I've set a single rendering, and that's the rendering we're going to look at. And in this product we have set the values for all of these fields that you're seeing here. So you can see the SKU, name, status is a drop link, there's an image, a list of categories, and a purchase link. Alright, so it's a pretty simple template, and we're just going to load something like a detail page for this product. Alright, so with that in mind, I've used a controller rendering. So just to start from there, we're just returning the view, and what we are doing is we're getting the current context item. So this is another thing. We usually get sitecore.context.item and we are doing a glass cast. So one interesting thing is whatever you're doing, without hitting the sitecore.data.item object itself, with any object of that type, item type, you can actually do everything in Glass. And it's pretty interesting to try and figure that out, what the corresponding thing is. So in this case, again, we're not using sitecore.data.item. You just need to say get current item, and that gets the context, right? And we are casting it into a product type, which is our model, and you can see that it's generated from TDS, right? So that's your product, and we had already seen the model. So we had we had created custom properties for the reference fields, which was status and categories. So status is a drop link, categories is a multi-list, which is why it's like this. And in addition to that, you can also see we have a custom specifications, which is marked as Sitecore children. So if we look at this in Sitecore, so my item has possible children of type product specification, right? And that's going to have, once it opens, so that just has like a value and unit. All right, so each product has got child items as well, and what's interesting is you can map the child items or the expected child items also to strongly typed classes in a similar manner, right? So now we'll see that when we actually do the get item, the status, the categories, the specifications, all of them are going to get going to get pre-filled because of this mapping that we have done in the model. So now we'll go into the view. Excuse me. Alright, so this is the view that we have for the product detail, right? And okay, so edit. Alright, sorry, just reading my notes there. So the SKU and the name are pretty much simple because they are string fields, and all we do is we use @editable for them. We have an example of an image using render image. We have an example of a link using render link. Then we move on to begin edit frame. Right? To see, to understand this better, I think we'll just look at the page in page editor mode first. So going back to this in product, I'm just going to open the page in page editor mode. So you can see that this is just strings, so these are editable, which is great. And then you have an image, which is also editable in this case. You have the link, which is also using the same render link, and it's editable. Now coming to these two. So you have the status and you have the categories. So this is a drop link field, and you can see that I have these additional buttons coming here for edit. So edit the item field. If I click on that, it's giving me the field, the status field, and a content author can change this in the page editor mode itself, and then save and publish as usual. And the same thing, we're going to look at categories. So in this case, it's a multi-list. Cool? Right. So we're just going to see how this was set up. So to set this up, what you need to do is, because this can be done on any HTML. So page editor mode or Sitecore or Glass in this case is not aware of what HTML is there inside it. So we are just putting a frame around the HTML and saying that when this is selected in page editor mode, here's the item, here's the field. If they click on edit that field for the item that is passed in. Okay, it's just not worried about what is there inside it. So you can literally do it for any HTML. You could do it for the entire product and just add whatever fields you wanted. And you can add multiple fields. In this case, I've just shown one field each, right? You can add multiple fields. So how do we do that? So you need to actually make the, so the item we're going to pass in when we create, sorry, going back to the code. So in begin edit frame, inside you can have anything you want. To make it work, we are giving the item path of an edit button. Alright, and this, as you can kind of understand, actually resides in core, and we're going to look at the core database. Okay, you're passing in the item path. It doesn't work with item ID for some reason. I have no idea why. It only works with item path. And the second parameter that we're passing in is identifying which item to edit. Right? So, and this first parameter is basically telling it which field or fields need to be editable in this case, need to come up in that edit pop-up that you saw. So going into, we're just going to see it in core. So you need to go into applications, web edit, and edit frame buttons. So one thing to note here is that this default folder is the only thing which will be there by default. You don't want to delete it, because what I usually do is you just go and, I mean, for each of the edit frames that you want to create, you can go ahead and make a copy of this and then just rename it to what you need, because it has sub items. You wouldn't want to create them separately, so that's kind of a shortcut. So let's look at categories. I've created a copy of the default, and on the folder itself you give the title and tooltip. So that's what actually comes up here. That's what you see here. And in addition to that, the only change that you make if you've copied from the default is the title over here, and then in the edit item this is where you can specify the field or list of fields. So in this case I have just one field, right? Yeah, the tree list field which was there, the one that you want to show up when you click on edit. If you want multiple, see, it takes pipe separated. So I can give categories and status, and I can wrap both of the fields together in the edit frame. I can do that if I wanted to. Then I have to just create one folder here. So we can do that also. It's not a problem. Alright, so this is where you give the field or list of fields. And going back into the code, you'll see that I'm actually providing the item path of the folder, the categories folder that we created. But I'm not hard coding the path or the ID. So we're using Glass generated code again over here. So how are we doing that? That's why I have created the TDS core project. And you'll see that I have managed, or I've added the same folder, what we just saw in core. And to be able to generate this item code, so initially we had spoken about code being generated for templates as well as for items also. You could do that. So in this case we want the item properties because we want the path of the item. So how are we doing that? You need to go into the properties for any, this is going to be available for any item. So you need to go into the properties and set your CodeGen file. And this is going to give the list of CodeGen files that you have managed for the TDS project. You have to pick item.paths.tt. And one thing to note here is any point in your tree, if you set item.paths.tt, it's going to set it for all the descendants as well. Unless you go into the descendants and override it, it's going to apply to all the descendants from that point in the tree. So because of the template that I set, you'll see that, again, this is a part of core CodeGen. So similar to the master that we had seen the properties. So similar to that, we have set it in core as well. And you can see that the item properties include the item ID, item name, item path, template name, and you can definitely extend to this by modifying the T4 template file as we had seen. Right? So that's it. You just need to go and create that item in core, give the path here, give your model ID, and you're all set. Cool? So this would also apply to other unknown tags or any unknown bit of HTML. So basically any HTML. So it gives all kinds of support. And so that was pretty cool because I recently realized you can do that. We were jumping through hoops to get page editor support in a lot of different things like background images. So in this case, this would be like ideal to be able to get that. So going back into the presentation. So the next thing, small topic that we can talk about is creating custom HTML helpers in Glass. So the ones that we saw in the previous slide, the render link, render image, things like that, they are all the helpers that are coming by default in Glass. And so in the first slide, if you remember, I had mentioned that you can use Glass without TDS. All right. But what would be the disadvantage in that case? So in that case, you will not be using the automatic CodeGen. You will only be using all the stuff that we have been talking about in views, all the HTML helpers and all of that comes with the GlassMapper library. So you can use one without the other, but definitely it's most beneficial to use both of them together. You get the maximum benefits out of them, and you have to write minimum code manually that way. So I've given a few examples of scenarios where we might find custom HTML helpers useful. So in this case, say in Verndale, we have a standard where all the page templates have redirect links on them. So if you render a link to any page, if a redirect link is set on that template, then it just does a 301 or 302 redirect. You can select that as well. So based on the type of redirect you have set, it does a response.redirect or it does a server.transfer, and of course that is going to affect the URL on your browser. So for things like this, now suppose you have a redirect link set and you set it as, target equal to blank, and you want to open the redirect link in a different tab of the browser. How would you do that? Because if we are doing the redirect in your code, so there's no way of setting target equal to blank, because that needs to be done on the anchor tag that is getting rendered, right? So how do you do that? You can go and override the render link or begin render link, whatever, all the link HTML helpers. You can go and override them and check that if the target ID, if it's an internal item, and if the target ID has a redirect link set on it, and if the link is set to open in a new tab, then you add target equal to blank. So that is something, that is a scenario in which we would go and override the render link. Now here's another case in which we have render item link. So I don't have a method like this right now, because in the render link and begin render link and everything that GlassMapper is providing, that only works for general link fields. So what if you just have an item? I have a tree list in which I have a set of links, and I need to render the links for each of these items, right? So what do we do right now? We just create an anchor tag. So instead of that, you can create custom helpers, HTML helpers, which could also handle the scenario that we just spoke about for render link. So just to quickly show an example of that. So this is an example of a HTML helper, and this is something that we've written and we're not used in our project yet, but we're going to use, because it's pretty cool that way. This was a requirement that came up. So we have a base navigation class, which or a base navigation template, which all the pages actually inherit from. So if you're trying to, and this is a generic method, so you can pass in any model here, and we're using glass, of course. So if it can be cast into base navigation, then we are doing all of this, and we are also checking here. So we are checking that if the navigable page, and how did I get I got the navigable page by casting the page into base navigation. So if it is set to redirect to a new tab, and this is the method where I'm actually going and looking at the target item and getting the target of the link, right? So this is the method that's doing that. So if that is true, then what I'm doing is the anchor tag, when I render it to this item, I set target equal to blank. So doing this, it allows your developers they don't have to go into every single view and make sure they check all this. So again, the whole point is reusability and not having the same code over and over again, and so it also reduces the scope of issues in this case. So this is a simple example of why we might need to override or create new HTML helpers. And additionally, there's also the possibility of having this for when we are rendering unknown HTML tags. The way I said, like we have the picture tag in HTML5, so things like that, you might want to create HTML helpers. And also, you don't have to do it for complete HTML tags. You can even do it for attribute sets, right? You can, if like our front end keeps chugging out stuff at us, and where you have a set of attributes for, say, responsive images on any kind of tag. So in that case, you would want to use a helper method just for giving as output those attributes, say the mobile URL, the tablet URL, and the desktop URL. So something like that. And possibly when you're creating these, or overriding the existing methods, you can also possibly embed edit frame into that HTML helper. In that case, you don't have to yourself go and say edit, add the edit frame and all that in the view itself. You can directly put it in the HTML helper. And where we were doing this, so where we are actually doing all of this is you need to extend this glass view, right? So in the view, to be able to access all of these methods that GlassMapper provides, you need to inherit from the glass view. So if you wanted to override any of these methods or overload any of these methods, then you might want to extend this glass view class, right? Now moving on to the next slide. So just a basic, actually we've gone over most of this, but other benefits of CodeGen is template grids. You don't need to manually hard code any of these, and so you don't need to hard code any of these, like previously in index searches and everything, we actually used to give the location, the folder location, and the template grid and things like that. So all of these used to be grids or paths, but we had to hard code them in some way or the other. Either you put it in the code, which was obviously frowned upon, but then you can also put it in the app settings. So that's what we used to do, and GlassMapper allows you to do away with that altogether. In addition to that, accessing dictionary items, you can do it with CodeGen instead of hard coding anything at all. And field names are available as properties now, so any item field names don't need to be hard coded anywhere, right? So talking about scalability now. So currently there's a limitation where each TDS project can have only a single class file. So we saw in the TDS project properties that we can mention the class file. So the obvious limitation that comes out of that is that each TDS project can have only one CS file, and all the code that you decide to generate for your TDS project is going to go into that one single file. So you need to, very importantly, keep an eye on the size of your model file, because it's quite actually easy for that to run out of hand, and we have firsthand experienced the pains that it comes with. And Visual Studio literally cannot, obviously it's not designed to handle like 500,000 lines of code on one file, so everything's slowed down. So you need to keep an eye on that. And the way, the different workarounds that you can actually work on to some kind of solution to having these huge, humongous model files. So one of them is that you split your TDS projects logically if necessary. So in like, for instance, in one of our projects, what we did was we split our TDS file for, as in we had a separate TDS file for the content and for the templates. So in this case, all our classes got, all the template classes got generated in a separate file, and all the content, as in the all the code gen for all the items that we included in the content, those all got generated in a separate file. So that's how we have gone around to splitting the files, as in we split the TDS projects itself. And in addition to that, you need to make sure or keep in mind that you generate code only for items that you need to use in your code, especially the item paths.tt, because it's a little easy for it to go out of hand if you, especially considering the fact that all the child items inherit the code generation property from the parent. So even by mistake, if you were to enable code generation for, say, a bucketed folder, so it might have like 1,000 products under it, and you definitely don't need the item ID of all the products under it. You might need it for the top level folder for doing index searches and stuff, but you definitely don't need it for all of the component items. So in that case, you need to make sure that it's turned off for the child items, right? Because it by default is going to get turned on. So things like this we need to consider when we talk about scalability. And in line with scalability, there's also the scenario of a multi-site solution, right? And this is one of the scenarios that we actually came across recently in one of our projects. So if you look at the structure that we have here, the template structure, so in this scenario, just imagine that we have shared templates. We also have site 1 and site 2 templates, right? So it's a multi-site solution, and we have organized the templates in this manner. And think of a common situation where we have web projects for each of the sites that we are building. So you have site 1, site 2, so you have site 1 web and site 2 web. And similarly, you have shared web, which actually has all the shared classes and all the shared resources that you need, and these and it's going to be referenced by all the site web projects, right? So in this scenario, because site 1 web and site 2 web are different web projects, we are going to use the site 1 templates only in site 1 web, and we are going to use site 2 templates only in site 2 web, right? So what happens is we are going to add so in the TDS project, when we create the TDS project with the site 1 templates, it generates the site 1, say, template files, and that gets generated in the site 1 web project, which is awesome. But the problem comes that if we just generate this template code in site 1 web, your shared if your base product is actually the base template for site 1 product and site 2 product, in site 1 web, if you just added the site 1 templates, you will not get the SKU. So what you need to do is, in your TDS projects, for the respective site templates, you also need to include the shared template. So this is something we learned the hard way, because we tried doing it in many different ways, but it didn't really work out. So you need to make sure that to maintain the inheritance structure, all your shared templates are also there in the respective site template TDS projects. And another point to note here is that when you're extending the shared templates, even though they're going to be available in all the site TDS projects as well, you want to do it in the shared. And anytime you're trying to use a shared template, you want to use it from the shared project namespace. And that's because you don't want to extend your shared templates in all the site projects. You can extend it in just one project, in only the shared project, and use it from there everywhere. So these are the main considerations that we noticed while creating multi-site solutions and using GlassMapper and TDS in them. And in addition to that, small points were that all the Sitecore sites, as in all your app config and any custom Sitecore modules that you have, we added all of those in the shared project. So that was in addition to it. So that's with regard to multi-site solutions with GlassMapper. And moving on, we have a few tips that are available here for GlassMapper usage. And I think we've actually gone over some of these, but just to go over them again, try to use glass generated models wherever you possibly can. So that's the whole point of using this framework. And add null checks before rendering item fields. So that is just good practice. And then, so we spoke about the GlassMapper model and version control merge issues. So the solution would be to regenerate the code. We spoke about this. And keep your data clean, avoid mapping exceptions for deleted items. So this is a scenario where if you okay, so in this scenario, just consider that you have say a tree list field and you have referenced items there, but you went and deleted some of the referenced items. So anyone who's worked in Sitecore has definitely seen this, where if there's a reference to a deleted item, it just shows the GUID, and it doesn't, because it can't find the item, it just shows the GUID. So in that case, if you try to map that tree list to a custom property in GlassMapper, it is going to give you a mapping exception. So how can we avoid this? The first way of avoiding it is, if you're deleting items, always make sure that it gives you an option that delete the references as well. So make sure you check that you want to delete the references, right? And if you are installing a package, in which case you don't get any warning or anything, so the best practice after installing a package to remove the broken links is to run the broken links report from Sitecore. So it will directly tell you where the broken links are, and in that way, if you follow these two principles, you can pretty much avoid all mapping exceptions. And the last point here is that you have to keep page editor support in mind at all times, and this is where begin edit frame is actually a godsend, because you can make anything editable at this point, right? So keep page editor support in mind at all times. Good Sitecore site will let the content author do anything and everything from page editor mode itself. That's all I actually had with regard to GlassMapper. Anyone has any questions? Okay, so Razor Engine is basically the framework that you're using to create your MVC views. All right, and GlassMapper is a layer on top of it. Yes, so the HTML helpers that we spoke about, right? So it is going to generate your Razor code for you. So it's basically a layer on top of it. And GlassMapper, I think it has support for ASP.NET also, but we are using it with the MVC. So in case of MVC, it is a layer on top of Razor. All right. So that's all I actually had. I have one last slide, which is for the next session that we have. So we're planning to have the session again once in 2 months. So the next session is going to be in July, or mostly end of July 2015. So we have one session which is which we have kind of finalized here, which is about usability of a content management system. So in the first session that we had in the kickoff meet, it was more of an engineering thing. In the second one, that's today, we had a session on front end as well. So we are trying to get in all the groups possible, and introduce all this Sitecore from all different perspectives possible. So in the next session, we have one which is going to be taken by Chetan Karnam, who is a senior QA engineer at Verndale, and he's going to talk about usability of Sitecore sites from his perspective. So I think he has like almost 2 years of experience testing Sitecore sites, and he's tested a multitude of those. So that should be an interesting one from a QA perspective, Sitecore sites from a QA perspective. And the second slot, we are open for ideas, requests. If anyone's interested, you're doing anything cool with Sitecore, anything you want to present, please send in an email, or post something on our on the meetup group that we have. So just contact us in any way you want, and we can definitely set up a session. So right, that's all I had then. Thank you for attending, everyone.